back to Zero Production Value Movie Reviews. I am Hoernke, and today I'm going to be discussing the 1981 horror film Friday the 13th, Part 2, directed by Steve Miner. So after the surprising success of the first film just a year earlier, this direct sequel was produced using a different director. They had discussed a few ideas, I think, surrounding sequel to the Friday the 13th. They had talked about a prequel. They had talked about making an anthology series where it was just kind of loosely connected by mythology but didn't really have a direct correlation. Despite the Jason character originally kind of being cast off or a joke, really got latched onto, and ultimately, as we know, that's what spawned what would start in Friday the 13th Part 2, really, and continue for, I honestly can't even remember how many movies. 11, 12, something like that. Jason here still bears little resemblance to what he would become in the future. This film follows a similar pattern to the first film. Only 5 years have passed in the film chronology, 20 years from the original events of, Jason drowning and to the events of the first film, and then only 5 years. So it's a lot more of a condensed mythology there. So it's still in sort of recent memory what happened at Camp Crystal Lake in the first film. They would continue to codify slasher norms. You have a final girl, you still have the group of young people you're gathering for sex and then to be dispatched one by one. There's an uptick in the gore and violence. It's still very 1982 gore and violence, but there's really not much difference between Part 2 and Part 1. So, it really just becomes a template. You take a killer, kill a bunch of people, kill the killer, and it ends. It's basic. And that turns out to be a pretty boring, lazy enterprise for this outing. The film opens as, in another thing you kind of tend to see in these slasher films, it opens as the last survivor, the final girl of the first film, is dispatched at the beginning of this film in basically the opening scene. And then it's time for some fresh meat. There's a camp of counselors, not at Camp Crystal Lake, but on the same lake, just around a little bit, and Camp Crystal Lake, or aka Camp Blood, has been cordoned off, and they aren't allowed to go there anymore. So all these camp counselors are showing up. So there aren't even campers per se here. It's all camp counselors, I guess, learning to go be counselors. The rumors and gossip abound about what happened at Camp Blood 5 years previous, but not too much thought is really given to it. Only 2 of the counselors really even try to go there, and they don't even get there, which I thought would have actually been interesting if they had gotten to go to the camp and sort of explore it, but they don't even let them do that. So nobody here really believes in the boogeyman, but I'll tell you what, the boogeyman believes in them. So one by one, these counselors are murdered by a burlap sack wearing predator that we can only assume to be Jason. And it's not really, I guess it's just understood, right? So eventually they separate, and there's like a small group that stay at the camp, and a bunch go out for a night on the town. And you see, there's no real famous faces here. Not like, the only one you got from Part 1 was Kevin Bacon, who kind of went off to do some stardom. This one doesn't even have anybody. I didn't recognize anybody in this film. So Jenny, who is the final girl of this Part 2, she theorizes a little bit about, what if Jason's still out there, and how old would he be, and what it must be like. And even that little light cursory is about all you get really delving into his backstory, the mythology. But that also becomes a thing in not only this series, but other series, is there's always sort of one character or group of characters that eventually try to delve the mythology of the killer and expose his story for this film, and kind of also sets up how they could possibly come to beat the killer. So with that, meanwhile, the group back at the camp, the small group that stayed, they're dispatched one by one. And for the most part, they do it like they did in the previous one, where they're hacked off one at a time in new and interesting ways, but nobody else realizes it's happening until it's their turn kind of thing. So it's not like everybody running around all willy-nilly. So finally, Ginny and Paul, who's the owner of the camp, or not the owner, the runner, the head guy, the head counselor guy, Ginny and Paul return, and they find out what's been going on, and this final clunky battle. I always wondered if other people were going to come back, because a whole bunch of them went to town. But it was only Ginny and Paul came back, but that's all they wanted to deal with, I guess. So they confront Burlap Sack Man, who they figure out is Jason, and this final clunky battle sort of ensues. It's really kind of hard to watch because it's so it just doesn't really work that well. It's not The Matrix. It is not. So ultimately, Ginny grabs a machete and deals what seems to be a killing blow to Jason. We get a final stinger like we do in the last film, which is also would become a franchise norm, as Jason is apparently dispatched, but then, in a final in a final scene, we get him like re-emerging or doing something. I'm pretty sure that Jason is nigh immortal, as he is just dispatched and ultimately will rise again. I think about the only thing that could really kill Jason is probably bad box office. The most interesting here, story-wise, was probably Jason's creepy shrine to his mother. I think I remember seeing that as a kid, and I remember it freaking me out, where he walks in and he's got this little shrine complete with her old clothes and withered head that, as we know, was separated from her body most heinously in the first film. So ultimately, this movie is just kind of hokey and derivative of the first movie, and didn't do enough to separate from the first film. It just sort of played it straight, Mark 1, Mod 0, and the only thing it really did was proclaim that, hey, Jason's still alive, and now he's the killer. And like I said, in this early iteration, Jason is more clumsy and stupid and fumbling as a killer than the supernatural psycho freak that he would eventually morph into. Still no hockey mask here. I think that makes an appearance finally in the next film, in part 3. Don't quote me on that, but I think I'm remembering that correctly. The only reason that this movie probably hasn't been exiled and forgotten to the dusty bin of, forgotten films is that it is a part of this, uber franchise, one of the seminal franchises of slasher films. But it's probably not one of the more watched films in the Friday the 13th series, and only if you're doing this sort of completionist thing or a marathon does it really hold any kind of allure to even watch. Hasn't really aged well, and not a whole lot of redeeming value here, other than, like I said, if you wanted to complete have the whole series kind of under your belt. And I don't think I'd ever seen part 2 before. So for all that, I'm going to give Friday the 13th Part 2 from 1981, directed by Steve Miner, a D. I love you. I appreciate you. Thanks for watching my movie review. I enjoyed making it. As always, I am Eric Hoernke. That rhymes with turnkey. And this has been a production of Zero Value.